Hey guys, so I just wanted to take some time just for a few minutes to talk about some current things that are going on in the coffee industry right now. And one of the biggest things that is happening is the commodity driven price market and how it's influencing specialty coffee. So, the commodity driven price market, called the C market, around this time last year was $1.80 some cents per pound of green coffee. And now, because of weather impacts hitting Brazil. Brazil is the largest grower of coffee and exporter of coffee, so it dominates the commodity market, which then dominates the stock market and kind of coordinates pricing mainly for the commodity market. But now we're actually starting to see the commodity market affect the specialty coffee market, because what used to be $1.85 around this time last year per pound in green coffee is now over $4. So the absolute lowest grades of coffee are sold for around $4 a pound green. And what is really crazy is when we think about specialty coffee, it's coffee that is rated anything above 80 points on a very calibrated grading scale. And what's really insane about this is specialty coffee. There's a lot of work involved in all of this. You have to go through picking, processing, separating out into different lots and grading them. There's so much work involved just to take the cherry off of the tree, process it, and then sell it off to somebody else. So what's happening right now is a lot of these producers that are growing coffee that have signed contracts with specialty coffee roasters or all sorts of other roasters, saying, hey, for X amount of years we'll buy your coffee at this amount per pound. Well, what's happening now is that amount per pound is now near the commodity market, to where producers can just pick all the cherries at once, and then just give them to somebody else to then take care of. And it's a really interesting situation, because with specialty coffee, you don't just have one day of picking. Cherries ripen at different rates, so you need to pick them off at the days that they're most ripe, and then process them, grade them, sort them. All of these things that revolve around specialty coffee is an enormous amount of work. And over the past few years, we're already seeing a decrease in available pickers come harvest. Usually, like for big farms, people can hire dozens upon dozens of pickers, sometimes 50 or more of pickers, and now nobody wants the work. They're all moving to America. They're all moving for better opportunities and higher pay. So what one of my coffee producers farms, I really love his coffee, Diego Barona. What he has to do is essentially pick a lot of people up from the nearest city, come every harvest once a year, and drive 2 hours out into the country where his farm is. He has to house everybody, feed everybody. I think he 2 years ago was paying for around 50 people to work on his farm come harvest. So you have to do all of this work in order to make it sustainable. And now imagine somebody just saying, hey, I'll take all of your cherries, and it don't care about how ripe they are, essentially, and I'll pay a really good amount for them, all because the C market is over twice as high as what it was last year. So this is really crazy with specialty coffee, because essentially now you have the really big players in the industry signing contracts at the minimum amount for $1 million. It's really, they're trying to get all the cheaper coffee that they can find, and it's really going to impact this whole industry once everybody's current supply of coffee at their roaster, or current supply that they've signed for, which a lot of producers are actually pulling out of contracts. And they're like, why go through all this work? We can pull out of contracts, that's fine. We're overseas, there's not a lot of liability involved. So I mean, it's just creating a chaotic mess. And now you have wholesalers. One of them just reached out to me today saying that they're going to essentially, what they purchased in January of last year, that coffee, it was a pretty high quality coffee for specialty coffee. It was in like the low 80s, right? It's nothing special. That coffee was like $4.80 some cents a pound in green. And now that coffee is about 15% higher. It's not much higher, especially compared to 200+% what we're seeing on the specialty market. But this is just a sign of prices starting to increase and starting to affect their industry. And what is really interesting about this is when a wholesaler now has to pay 15% more for a product that is their blend. So they sell about probably 95% plus their wholesale products revolve around this one product. And then all their higher end specialty coffee, single origin, the fun stuff, that's typically around 5% or less of so many roasters' offerings. So you have this big product that roasters are relying on to pay their staff, their many multiple locations, all of their wholesale partners, because the roasters need to make a profit too. If that's 15% higher, what is the wholesale price going to have to be in order to make their operation sustainable? Typically with a wholesale, maybe you'll charge double the amount that you paid for it for green coffee, including also the labor involved and the packaging and so on and so forth. And then typically what you'll do is want to charge any business, for a retail front, you'll want to charge about 4 times what you paid for it. So this is pretty typical. Usually businesses will aim for like a 25-30% cost of goods, and then they'll profit the other 75 some percent, and then that determines how they pay for everything, how they pay for their staff and their lease and everything, down to typical successful businesses will then profit in total about 5%, 6%. In the coffee industry, that's actually pretty good. In the retail coffee industry, that's around 6%, which is kind of sad if you think about it, considering a lot of these shops are, probably making $500,000, $600,000. What's 6% of that? And then that goes to paying off other things. For the owner, and all that's in the safe zone. So it is really interesting just thinking about how this is going to affect retail cafes having to charge higher prices. In bigger cities, it's common for lattes to be $7, $8, $6, $7, $8, and we're seeing those numbers definitely go up over the past few years. But that, $6, $7, $8, that's the very low end of specialty coffee. That's the right around 80, 83 points. It's really the blend of specialty coffee, the lowest kind of grade of specialty. And now imagine coffees that cost double that per pound. So we're talking about, coffees that cost maybe like a year ago, like I said, $4.80 a pound in green. Now imagine we just paid $13 a pound for one of our really fun, very experimental, very high grade coffees. $13 a pound, that is, almost three times more expensive. So typically, to maintain similar margins, that $6, $7, $8 latte should really be $21-ish, which is absolutely absurd. And the industry kind of knows, okay, like, we're not going to profit that same percent off of this coffee. It's just, nobody's going to charge that much for a cup of coffee, even though it is a really good coffee. There's ways of counterbalancing that, and blending's a big one too. So like, we just blended that coffee with 40% of another coffee, and it actually helped improve the flavor profile. So there's ways of kind of managing this. But what is essentially happening right now is you have very little supply, especially from Brazil getting hit by some natural weather disasters causing lower harvests, and you have a lot of demand for that low supply. So what's going to happen now is a lot of coffee farmers, or a lot of farmers in general, are saying, hey, why am I growing, bananas when they're selling at this price, but coffee over here is doing really well? So they're going to start planting coffee trees, and in about 3 to 5 years, once those trees are old enough to start producing cherries, they can then sell those coffee cherries or process them and sell the beans, depending on where they're at and what kind of market they want to play into, but and then you're going to have an oversupply for a smaller demand. So we're going to see prices go really, 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 really high and then crash back down again. So it's going to be a really interesting half decade or so in the coffee industry. And we're going to continue to see retail cafes. Unfortunately, a lot of them just offer lower and lower and lower quality coffee, because the cost of coffee is so expensive. Everybody's going to be trying to, all the wholesale coffee shops are really going to be trying to get affordable coffees to keep their prices similar as to what they are. They're going to have to, unless something changes in the next few months, they're going to have to go up. Prices are going to have to go up with wholesalers, unless they have this massive stock of green coffee that they bought for a very cheap amount and somehow they're holding on to, which doesn't happen. Coffee goes bad pretty quickly, depending on what kind of coffee it is, green coffee that is. Sometimes it can take a few years, other times it could start going bad in months. But it's just going to be a really interesting time. I think this is to kind of shine some light on the situation. I've always kind of wanted to see what it would be like for two cafes to become divided based on the cost of their menu. And as strange as that is to say, essentially, you can think about the beer industry. When you think about a Bud Light, you're going to be paying for a Bud Light S price. But when you think about a really nice beer brewed by a really respected microbrewery that's in your hometown, chances are you're going to be paying in a different price tier than that commodity beverage, right? So with cafes, this isn't really a thing yet, because everybody's still relying on really low quality but still barely specialty quality coffee for coffee blends that then go into 95% ish of what they sell. So now I think what we'll start to see is kind of a shift, kind of a separation of commodity-based coffees and the way that they operate and the menu that they have and their service models and everything incorporated into that sector. And then over here you'll have other coffee shops that are based around sourcing micro lots like we are, and there's not a ton of us, because a lot of people are still focused on sourcing those 83 point coffees as opposed to the much higher quality 86 plus point coffees. But in hindsight, I think you'll start to see the separation in terms of not only price of determining quality of coffee, but also determining different service models, certainly different menus, more choices of coffees, more of a story of coffees for the higher end, more expensive sector. And then in the cheaper area, you'll have kind of what we still continue to have to this day. Granted, those prices, at least over the next few months, will probably be more expensive. Maybe it'll die down and simmer by this time next year. We really don't know. Things will certainly change, but this is kind of where we're at right now. And just to shine a little bit more light on the situation, I think there's never been a better time to start brewing coffee at home, because when you think about it, you can buy a bag of really nice coffee and typically get around, per pound, you can get around 22, 30-ish brews out of that bag. But when you go to a retail cafe, like I said before, you're going to have to charge so much more per cup because you need to start paying for everything about 4 times more than what it would be if you were to essentially brew it at home, something along those lines. So if you want to keep on drinking really high quality coffee and find out that your local cafes, coffee isn't tasting as good as it did before, I definitely suggest to still support them and see how they're managing through this situation, because it's tricky for everybody. But also to look at seeing how you can still, if it's becoming harder to then buy lattes every other day, or how often you go to your shop, maybe just try and buy coffee bags from that company as well, and still support them in a way that's more financially doable for a lot of people. These times are very hard, and I think everybody's just learning, and a lot of small businesses are definitely learning. And it's not, it's a tricky sea to navigate right now. But at the end of the day, coffee is a very resistant market, right? It's there's so many different ways that we can continue to evolve as an industry, like we've always done before. And I think it's one of the most interesting markets at that, because of the way that we've navigated over these tens of so many decades. We're very resilient industry, and I think that there is always going to be these kinds of hiccups involved, but it's going to lead to very interesting things. That's absolutely for sure, and we can't predict what those things are going to be. But I think that this is a very unfortunate yet very positive time, because producers are now being paid more than they ever have. And this is something that we've always talked about in the industry, wanting to improve producers actually being paid a living wage, because fair trade is just 20 cents above commodity market prices. It's nothing crazy. And often specialty coffee, typically all specialty coffee roasters, basically, other than what's happening right now, have been paying well above fair trade. And it's just honestly, to me, a gimmick at this point. Just having that label and thinking that you're doing something amazing, and unfortunately just greenwashing this whole situation. But basically, producers are getting paid a higher dollar amount, and that's, I think, something that we should certainly celebrate. With other industries, it's led them to, you look at Napa, and you look at different wine industries, and just wineries, and you just see the wealth that these businesses have accumulated. Went on a bourbon tour a few months ago, and it was just astonishing seeing these places and how well that they're able to do. And I've been reading a book by one of the founders, and it's fascinating. And I think if we can provide more of that to coffee producers, if we can give them more of this kind of pedestal, instead of just blending them in with everybody else, instead of just saying, oh, it came from this farm, or it's from this country. I think consumers need to realize that specialty coffee is often a very small percentage of what producers grow and produce. It doesn't just come naturally. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to make these kinds of tasty coffees. And often a lot of places, I believe Daterra, the biggest farm in Brazil, their specialty coffee grade out of their whole entire harvest is only 25%. And 1% is their absolute crazy experimental tier. But then the other, around 74% of coffee that is produced there, is commodity grade coffee. And this is how hard it is. And I think that we really need to start educating consumers on what this is, what specialty coffee is, what it represents, and not just trying to blend it into a latte that we should expect people to pay, with these prices, $8, $9, maybe a little bit more dollars. I don't think that's fair without education. And this is a very, very interesting time. I thought I'd just share some of these thoughts, just kind of riffing off the top of my head after I've been absorbing all of this information since hearing about it about a week ago. But yeah, I thought I'd just educate you guys and let you know what the industry is going through and getting ready for some change. Let's keep the positive vibes going, and I think I know it'll be a good year for us at Pit Stop. We're prepping for everything, prepping for our wholesale accounts, our price lists, what we're about, what we stand for, and I see a lot of I have a lot of enthusiasm and hope for that kind of business model moving forward. So yeah, all right guys, have a good night. Hope you learned something.